Well, hello. Welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is author Barbara Caver. We're going to be talking to her about her new book, A Little Piece of Cuba, a journey to become Cubana Americana. Cubana Americana. I'll get this eventually. Barbara, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me. And yeah, the subtitle gets trippy. We typically stop it at a little piece of Cuba. That's fine.
Okay, well, I like to be complete about these kinds of things. We'll be talking with Barbara about herself and her book and the advice she has for writers in just a bit. But as those familiar with the show know, we like to start things off talking about things we may have read or watched lately. Did we like them? Did we hate them? Are we kind of like, I don't ever want to have anything to do with that ever again? I will go first just to give Barbara a little time to collect her thoughts. So, three things that I watched recently. First one, it took I think stretched it out over 2 days, but it was the finale to Stranger Things on Netflix. It was okay. I enjoyed it. I was thinking, especially as season five kind of I worked my way through it. Did it have to be that long? There was just so many episodes, and a lot of things just felt really padded or really unnecessarily stretched out. And the finale, I mean, like, what is it? Like a 40-minute epilogue. Wow, that was just a lot. And I think they could have condensed it. I enjoyed it, but, I'm glad I watched it. And I don't think I ever need to watch anything affiliated with the show again. And the other two things were two movies. One, we really enjoy like the cozy little mysteries from the UK. So one is called Invitation to a Murder. And I forget Misha Barton, I think, is the lead. I could be totally wrong on that. But it's kind of light. That's the best way I could sum it up. I enjoyed it. There is a sequel, but we're waiting for it to not have to pay for it on Amazon. And the other one was that over this weekend here in San Francisco, our local theater had a San Francisco Noir series. And one of the movies they were showing, we had never heard of before. And unfortunately, the timing didn't work out, so we couldn't see it. So we watched it at home. And it's called Woman on the Run from 1950. And I think it's Anne Sheridan, and her husband witnesses a murder. And so he disappears, and this reporter comes to her trying to track him down. They go all over the city trying to locate him. And it was one of the most boring movies we've ever seen because we were led to believe it was going to be like this really exciting and gripping noir and, filmed in San Francisco in the 50s or late 40s. And just, we love that kind of stuff. And it was just, the dialogue was kind of dull. The acting was eh. And I think it was like an hour, maybe an hour 17, hour 20 minutes. It was really short, just really boring, just because we were surprised. And I think the sentiment we had the most was, boy, are we glad we did not go to see that at the theater. And I love the theater, but I'm glad they did not get our money for that one. So if you get a chance to see Woman on the Run, don't run the other way. So that's it from my end. Barbara, what about you?
Well, I have to say, hearing about the Woman on the Run experience, I was like hanging on every edge. I'm like, wait a second, San Francisco film noir, say more. And then to hear it was
Exactly.
boring, I'm absolutely taking your recommendation and not watching it. I was about to write down the title, then I was like, well, no, maybe not.
Yeah, don't.
Um, Well, earlier this year, you're talking to a filmmaker, so you're speaking my language, Paul. Earlier this year, actually, it was not something I watched recently, but it did happen earlier this year. My husband and I went on a little bit of a Hitchcock retrospective, and
Oh,
we watched Vertigo and North by Northwest,
oh,
both of which are just Vertigo's one of my favorite films since film school days and probably before that. But North by Northwest I hadn't seen in a long time, and that was definitely one worth watching. Um, Recently, though, coming off the holiday binge, I went in a totally opposite direction. The Muppets Christmas Carol is one
okay.
of my favorite films. It's also one of my favorite interpretations of that novella.
Yeah, well,
Um,
especially with so much of it lifted directly from the book.
it's great. The contrast, I appreciate more and more the contrast between Michael Caine just playing it straight and the
Mm.
Muppets doing the shenanigans around them. And then we also did watch. I think I watched more of it. My husband was like, "Do we really have to do this?" We watched the latest. We watched the latest Emily in Paris, but that
Okay.
was just since we're indulging over the holidays. Emily in Paris was just sort of our film indulgence or our television indulgence, if you will. So um, my thoughts on all of those shows have been, it relaxes my brain. It's a sugar rush, I get to walk away just enjoying everything about it, but also feeling a little high. So a little bit like
Okay.
I'm on a sugar rush, like I've indulged a little bit. We also are making our way through Witcher, which is I think we're
Okay.
watching it on we're watching it on Netflix, I believe, but I think it was
Hmm.
at some point on Amazon. I can't remember if that's the same series. So we're making our way through that one, and I tend to really lean towards the kind of the fantasy medieval
Sure.
genre a little
Hmm.
bit. And this one I'm definitely finding a little too um it's so much fluff. I need a break from it. It's trying to engage me, and it's not. I'm like, yeah, 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 I got it. You're a witch. There's spells, consequences. What there So let's see what happens. Let's move
Hmm.
move this along. So those
Okay.
are
Well,
the
I will say I wanted to say it at the time, but North by Northwest is my favorite Hitchcock film.
Oh yeah, it's a
That
great
I
one.
love
Yeah.
I love watching it, and you can't go wrong with Cary Grant. Um,
No.
and I
No.
was gonna say I haven't watched Emily in Paris. I know people who do enjoy it. To them, it's almost like a video version of comfort food.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And I was gonna ask, how many seasons is that up to now? Do you have
Ugh.
an idea?
I think this was season 4.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely been, and it feels like it's been on forever. It feels like to hear myself say it's season 4, I'm like, really? That's it? It seems like it's been there forever. So,
Wow. Okay.
I saw Bridgerton was about to come back, and I was like, oh, good. Follow it right up with another sugar high. Let's do this
I
thing.
was gonna say you can only eat so much mac and cheese.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what it feels like. It's like, okay, now I got to go to the gym, for like a day
Time to watch some
afterwards.
PBS. There you
Yeah, exactly.
go.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Barbara Caver, we're going to be talking to you today about A Little Piece of Cuba, your new memoir. We're going to address that in a little bit. But I like to read the about the author section that is in the book. Barbara Caver is a lifelong student of the arts and is an accomplished film and television production executive. She loves traveling, exercising, hiking, dancing, cooking, and eating, as well as writing about all of these things with great enthusiasm, affection, and humor. A Little Piece of Cuba, A Journey to Become Cubana Americana is her first full-length memoir. Raised in South Carolina, Barbara currently resides in Jackson Heights in New York City. All right, so Barbara, let us start with a little bit about you and your background. So, how did you get your start as a writer? I mean, this is a memoir, so it's a little bit different than some of the guests we've had before. Usually, that's more fiction. But as it said in your bio, you're an experienced writer and a filmmaker. So, like, how did you get your start? I always ask people, were you a voracious reader as a child, or is it something you kind of came to later in life, or you said you read somebody else's thing and said, I could do a much better job than that, and just sat down and had at it?
Um, I love answering this question because for me it was something that came really naturally. Like I picked up a pen as I don't remember a time in my life where I couldn't write. I'm sure obviously someone taught me how to write. But I picked up a pen and started writing short stories in my notebooks. I also liked telling stories. Yes, there was definitely the journaling that went on. So it was something I did from an early age. It was also learning the craft of writing was something I started, I think in the 4th grade was when I took my first creative writing class, things like that. So, and it was telling different stories and really kind of getting into the narrative of it. So it's something I've kind of kept up with as a hobby almost my entire life. When I was in film school, I did study screenwriting and wrote a lot of screenplays, wrote some teleplays, wrote a lot of television, and I kept hearing over and over again, this is a great book. It's not a movie, which is hilarious because I have a
They
film
said that about your
production.
scripts?
They said that about the scripts. They were like,
Wow.
great book, not a movie. So I was like, and that's purely speaking, I think, to the craft side of things and the way you have to craft a screenplay versus
Hmm.
how a narrative, how a book, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, is crafted. Um, So I was very into sort of the stuff that can't be shown on screen, the
Hmm.
internal journeys of the characters. I put a lot of description in there. It's like, I remember very early on seeing notes on my screenplays, like, you want to let the art director do their job. So,
Like we don't need to know what color t-shirt the character is wearing type of thing.
yeah, it's like there are people who do this.
Right.
Novelists have to do, novelists and longer, different writers. When you're writing a literary work, it's, you got to do a little more of those details
So
and things.
that's what I call how do we know that writing? Because
Yeah,
where
exactly.
the writer tells us like what the character is thinking or why they're doing something.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So
So
that explains the whole. This would make a better book than a screenplay.
that's exactly, I think at the time I didn't understand it. But I was excited by it. I was like, okay,
Ah.
at some point I'll have to figure out a way to write a book. So kept up with writing, through most of my professional life. And then when the pandemic hit, just like everybody, I had more time on my hands. And
Hmm.
I was ready to tell a story. I was ready to tell a story of my own, to tell a narrative arc and find something that that I really could kind of sink my teeth into. And the story of the trip to Cuba had been sticking with me for quite some time. My husband and I traveled to Cuba in 2017, so by the time the pandemic rolled around, it had been marinating for 3 years,
Hmm.
and I had been thinking about it. I had written some essays. I knew it had to be nonfiction. I knew I had to sort of engage my voice, make it, tap into some of those early diary stories, um, and make it very personal, because my experience of Cuba was very personal. So I
Right,
wanted to
right.
kind of get that across.
Yeah,
So
I was going to say that a lot of writers, when they're starting out or in the early stages, they're always said, write what you know,
mhm.
and some writers take it very literally. Like, well, I can only talk about skateboarding, or I can only talk about making mac and cheese so many times. But I think this is definitely a perfect example of that. But
Mhm.
it's also, I think, part of the what's interesting about the book, A Little Piece of Cuba, is that it was about you learning a lot of these things. It wasn't you knew these going in. A lot of this is about the discovery. And on that note, I what I like to ask the guest is like, give us, since you're familiar with the film world, you know what the elevator pitch is, or for writers, it's the cocktail party pitch. Like what is someone says like, what is this book about? And you would say,
I would say the book is about my discovery of my Cuban heritage following a trip to Cuba, and how I learned that I've always been more Cuban than I thought.
okay, that I love that. And so I also like to ask you, like, so the title is A Little Piece of Cuba, and I would love for you to explain, like, why is it you decided on that for the title?
Well, the title, actually, I'm terrible at titles.
Okay.
Terrible. I think originally when I started writing the book and was looking for, we're looking for a developmental editor to work with me on it, I think I called it Havana Smells Like Home. Perfectly fine, but terrible. And then
I can see the good and the bad about that one.
right, and then at one point I called it Destination Cubana, which I joked was sort of the like, that's the Hollywood version. That's,
Yeah.
that's like Fast and the Furious on the Malecone. I don't, that's something else.
Okay.
But that's what I stuck with, this idea of like going on a journey. It was actually at the suggestion of my publisher, She Writes Press, that they were like, are you open to changing the title? And of course I was like, yes. In fact, I was wondering at what point I needed to say, could we change the title? Because I'm bad at titles. And they came up with a couple of different options, actually a long laundry list of both titles and subtitles. And the one thing that they all had in common, though, for the main title was that they were all phrases from the book. So that
Oh,
was
okay.
something I had never considered before. So the title, so I ended up picking A Little Piece of Cuba. It resonated the most because that was something I felt like I was looking for. I was looking to find a little piece and define the little piece of Cuba that's in me. And also, what does that look like? It's something that has a boundary,
Hmm.
it's not, it's not a huge part of who I am, but it's definitely a very significant part. And
Sure.
so the phrase actually comes from a section in the book when I talk about my family and my extended Cuban family and the ranch that they had in Louisiana, which is a descendant of the ranch that they owned in Cuba. and how I didn't know it at the time, but every time I went to the ranch and I would spend summers there. I mean, some of my best childhood memories come from Valley Farm, is what it was called. And that's where I talk about how when I was there, I didn't know it at the time, but I was living in a little piece of Cuba. So that's where the title came
Okay.
from.
Sure, sure. So a lot of the book, so it sounds like it was inspired by, and I almost want to say triggered by your initial trip to Cuba in 2017. What was it that made you want to go in the first place? I mean, because it sounds like you hadn't been. What was it that was the motivation for, hey, saying to your husband, is Stephen, I want to say his name is?
Todd.
Todd.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, Stephen was your previous husband.
Right.
So Todd, hey, let's go to Cuba. I mean, what was the spark that that lit that?
I always had a curiosity about Cuba. And I think I knew when I started hearing from other people, not just from my family. My family definitely, no one really expressed much of an interest in going to Cuba. It was other Cuban Americans I met, particularly when I left the South and moved to New York, who they were the ones who were like, no, you can go. It's worst case scenario, it's going to be uncomfortable, you
Hmm.
know. So, but it was a question of, just getting comfortable with with feeling like, okay, I'm ready to learn more. Like at what point, I feel like I've learned everything I can learn from my family here in the United States, everything I can learn from a history book. Now I want to experience it for myself. That's the next step. And so I felt like I had, enough experience. I had traveled so much just as a hobby, and a little bit for work, but mostly I had enjoyed, like, travel is what I love to do for
Hmm.
fun. So I was like, all right, I'm going to take a real adventure and go to Cuba. And so I dragged Todd with me. And it was at a point, when the Obama administration had been rolling back travel restrictions for Americans traveling to Cuba. So it was at the very tail end of that, because I
Hmm.
believe 6 months after we went, the Trump administration shut it all back down and rolled it back even further. So
Yeah.
we were able to go, basically just buying a plane ticket and booking an Airbnb, which is not something you can do right now.
Right.
So we took advantage of that. And it was basically just a let's go and see what all the fuss is about kind of a trip.
Hmm.
And from the very moment I stepped off the plane, I was like, this is something different.
Wow.
This is not just a let's check it out. Yeah, have some connections here. It's like I felt it from the first breath I took. I'm like, this
Wow.
place is different. I belong here. I
Oh, that's great.
felt it. So
Oh, that's fantastic. One of the details I really enjoyed about the book, and I thought it was a great way to go from topic to topic, is that each chapter focuses on a certain subject. I mean, you've got your history, your family history. There's a chapter about the food. There's a chapter about religion, and so on. So, was that your intent from the start, or was that kind of like it developed along the way as you were writing those, or as you were writing all these out?
those the way that the chapters fell definitely was, was a something that developed along the way. The real sort of arc that I used in the book is actually, the trip to Cuba, as it appears when I talk about the trip to Cuba as it appears in the book, is actually in chronological order of those 5 days and when it happened. But then going back in time and, and coming up with those sort of bigger themes emerged. It was like, oh, well, this was the day we went to the church. This was the day we went to the beach. This was the day we went to the fort, and
Mhm.
how that and what I encountered there and how that took me back into my own personal history and memories.
Okay. I have to ask, I mean, there's a lot of information in here. Like, how did you decide what to include? And were there like subjects or topics that you wanted to include, but for some reason didn't? Like you thought, there wasn't enough to, have a full chapter about this, or there's way too much. I just can't cover this. Like this is a book unto itself. I mean, what was your I guess your personal editing process?
I think that, well, I mean, this is all such great. I like, these are the best questions. I think what I realized early on was that the central question of the book was, am I Cuban or not?
Hmm.
So I think that created a little bit of a filter. And I also had the photos from the trip. So even though, some years had passed, I was looking through those photos constantly. I would throw a picture of Cuba up when I was having like kind of, it's cold in New York. I want to remember something warm. Oh, I
Sure.
remember the beach in Cuba. Let me put that up on Instagram. So it had really become ingrained in my mind. So it was like laying out the photos and saying, okay, well, this is what we did. And, and understanding that like, there were moments, there was definitely a lot that happened in the trip that was sort of a present day almost travel log experience of
Hmm.
Cuba, which was great. And I wrote some great, very descriptive, almost silly sometimes silly travel stories, very cute travel stories. But then I was like, but that doesn't really have anything to do with me and what I was feeling at the time and what I've learned since and how I sort of interpreted it. So it was about reconnecting to the trip, but then also drawing parallels between what was happening on the trip and things I was seeing on the trip and my personal memory and
Hmm.
real and taking the reader along the path of like, is this Cuban? Oh yeah, it is. Oh, cool. Now I at least it's Cuban in the kind of Cuban that I feel I am, and what
Hmm.
that looks like. It was also important to me to my mother said this to me recently. She felt it was very important to that in the book that I was able to say, not every Cuban came through Miami. Not
Mm.
every Cuban American. There are some nuances. There are not all of us are good dancers. Those kind, things like that. So,
Sure. Sure.
yeah.
Was there a lot of, I mean, I think like maybe something that you experienced when you're in Cuba that triggered something. Did you immediately write it down, or was this kind of like all after the fact? You're trying to organize your thoughts. Okay, here's something that happened during the trip. Oh no, this reminds me of that thing on my grandparents' ranch. I mean, what was the process for putting it all together?
The a lot of the immediate connection happened while we were there in Cuba. As soon as we walked into the Airbnb we were staying in, we walked up this staircase at the back of the house, and as soon as we came into the host was showing us where the bathroom was, and I noticed tiles in the bathroom that
Hmm.
immediately reminded me of my grandmother's house. And I noticed even the cracks in the tarmac at the airport before we got off the plane reminded me of of the ranch in Louisiana. So those kinds of sense memories were so powerful. I didn't write anything down while we were there. I
Wow.
wrote a little bit on the plane back,
Hmm.
just saying like I couldn't believe how strong all my senses were activated, and how they were connecting to memories. It was a very powerful experience. So that's what I wrote down on the plane ride back, but I sort of let it all kind of sit there until I really sat down to say, okay, let me try to structure an essay about how I felt. And the only way into the emotion, well, the easiest way into the emotion was through those sensory details, both past and present,
Yeah. Right, right.
so it was
Well,
it was
one of the things
fun.
I did want to ask you is that some of the details get really specific. I mean, you're talking about addresses in Havana and some of the meals that you and your husband had, and like some of the house decor. So was that a lot of research on your part? Did you just have a ton of pictures? I mean, were you consulting with family, especially previous generations about like, oh, what was the address of that house? And someone said, oh, that was on, name, address, and street name here. I mean, what was the I guess collecting of information that you could apply with over the course of the book.
The sort of research,
Hmm.
I joke that that's my research process. It's like that those little bit of all the different, a little bit of everything that you mentioned.
Hmm.
Most of the immediate details on the trip to Cuba definitely came from my photos. I mean, I have over 700 photos from the trip. We were there for 5 days,
Sure, sure.
so some of them have been on social. The good ones have ended up on social media, you know.
Oh, here's one of my thumb.
Yeah,
That's a,
exactly. Or like, oh, let me take that picture 8 times. Okay, the
oh,
good version of that picture, is on the website or whatever, or will be there. And then some of it was I have luckily my family, they have a very good sense of preserving genealogy and preserving the family history.
hmm.
They were able to tell me a lot. They were able to, my grandmother, my aunts and uncles, even my mother, they were able to tell me a lot. And through my whole life, not just before I went, but throughout my whole life, they would tell me they made Cuba seem like an active, alive place. So that was nice. Now, no one could tell me an address because the
Okay.
Castro regime had changed so many names and street names and things like that, that you literally have to have a map kind of overlaid. This was the experience of one of my aunts who went to Cuba about a year after I did. She basically took a hand-drawn map and overlaid it over a map that they had in order to um, find a house that she had known as the house that she grew up in. So, and even then, when she got there, she actually couldn't see the house because there was a barricade around it, and they had
Hmm.
changed. They had put other buildings in front of it. They had changed the whole. Everything looked different. So it was very. So I had a few photos, and I was like, okay, yeah, I don't think that's around here. I don't know where this is. It had been a very long time since they left, but it just speaks to, I think, not just the changes that Fidel Castro and his regime made on Cuba, but also those changes could happen anywhere.
Hmm.
I think that there are. I felt, and I write about this in the book, that my childhood elementary school in Columbia, South Carolina, is still someone's elementary school, whereas
Right.
that's not the case with my mom. But then there are other buildings and other places that are part of my childhood that have been obliterated and are
Right.
totally different and don't exist anymore. So it was recognizing, it was understanding that I was there, but I was in a present Cuba, not
Hmm.
anywhere near their Cuba. So
Right, right. I was going to ask, that was something I was thinking while I was reading, that a lot of the book is your history, your
yes,
background and your experiences there. But you, like you said, you talk about previous generations, your parents and your grandparents. I think you even like go into like your great grandparents a little bit. How did you organize those? I mean, it sounds like a lot of it was, handed down from generation to generation, or you actually talked to the people. And did you get a lot of input, I guess, also from like members of your family from your generation? Like, I think you have a brother and I think some cousins as well. I mean, did you just go to everybody and say, what was your experience? Or like for those who had been there, or I guess especially the ones who left, I guess it sounds like it was so like late 50s, I want to say, is when
yes,
when a lot of them fled Cuba.
yeah. My mother and her siblings left Cuba in 1959 with my grandparents. So that's a great question, because I wrote a version of the book before I started talking to everyone. They knew I was going. I had anecdotes, and I had everything that I had remembered and everything that I had heard my whole life, and then I told a few of my family members. It's a big family, so the ones that I'm closest to had input right before my trip. And then the ones that I knew were very interested, like my aunt, who's very interested in, the family history and making sure that gets passed down. Um, it wasn't until nobody read the book until it was published,
Hmm.
though. And my brother read a copy before it was published, but it was at the point where I was like, I can't make any changes, so I hope you like it. you know. Luckily, the feedback and everything's been responsive. Just like you, they understand that this is my story, and they appear as sort of the supporting characters.
Right.
Um, they understand that I can't tell my story without me also telling theirs, and the role, and then they get to see the role that they played in my life, and how their example and their stories impacted my view of me and of myself as Cuban American.
Okay.
So
I wanted to say, so throughout the book, it's like you're always discovering something new about yourself, or at least your heritage. Now, was there something that just really resonated for you? I mean, as a result of going there, was something really eye-opening about Cuba? And also, was there something that was caught you totally off guard? Like, I did not see that coming, that sort of thing.
I love that question, because nothing caught me off guard. I was like, wait a second. What caught me off guard was that I didn't see this, was that I couldn't draw the connections, early on. And I think at one point when I was living in New York, and I felt like Cubans were kind of coming out of the woodwork, and I was constantly encountering a Cuban. And one of my colleagues, oh no, it was actually a friend of mine, actually, who we kind of casually knew each other. And then at one point he was like, I mentioned St. Barbara's Day, and he had told me his mother was named Barbara. And then finally he was like, are you like, do you have any connection to Cuba? Yeah, my mother was born there. And his response was, that explains everything. And I'm like, what do you mean everything? So it was very obvious to many people, but not obvious to me. And I think the biggest surprise was, I was like, oh, I got there, and I belong here. And then since I've been in other Cuban, communities and other Cuban places since then, I feel like I walk in with confidence now. It's like, yeah, sure, I might not speak Spanish. I might there's not, I mean, I'm American, I was born here,
Mhm.
but I definitely feel comfortable in a Cuban environment
Yeah, I was
because,
going to say there's an anecdote. I think when you were young, like you took a ballet class,
yeah,
and someone says, I can't I don't want to botch the line, but like someone else in the class said like, oh, you're from Miami, or
yeah.
I you could tell it much better than I can.
Yeah, no, the actual story is the classmate asked me when I told her my name was Barbara and she had watched the whole class and she said, "Oh, you must be from Miami." And I'm like, "Well, that's code for you're Cuban, you know?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm not from Miami, but my mother was born in Havana, you know?" So that honestly could have been a title too. I said that so much throughout my life, but yeah,
Hmm.
it was interesting.
Okay, I
So
wanted to ask you. So, have you been back to Cuba? I mean, was that your only trip back in 2017? Were you able to go back at least once or twice more?
no, that was the only trip. It was in 2017, and I haven't been back since. And a lot of that just has to do with the situation there. The pandemic has been rough.
Sure.
A lot of economic trouble, and then it's not been the island's not been in the best of shape. And I think too, I'm sort of waiting for another. I'm waiting for that next level. I
Hmm.
think I definitely want to go back. I'm just waiting to figure out when I or waiting for the call again, if you will, is
Sure.
sort of what I feel like I need. So
Okay. Is there something that you want to spread the word about I guess present day Cuba, like that might surprise a lot of people, or that again that it's something like they were unaware of, just something that you think everybody should know about Cuba today?
yeah, thanks for the opportunity to share this because I definitely put it in the book, but you got to get pretty far deep into the book to get to this part. It is not an easy place to visit, and I think there's a myth that and I still get this response to this very day. Oh, you must have had a great time. Well, yes, I had a great time, but 5 days it felt like we were there for a month.
Hmm.
There's a lot weighing on you as you're seeing how people live. It's very different from what you may expect, and it's very different from certainly very different. It was, I had the emotional impact of feeling, kind of a soulful connection to this place that I had thought I had absolutely no connection to. But I also think being in Cuba, it asks a lot of people, and you have to. I kind of um, say, I've been sort of trying to figure out how to say this, but it's like, are you a tourist or are you a traveler when you
Hmm.
go? And you have to understand what side of the line you fall on before you go to Cuba. And I think that's true for many places in the world, but for me, it's true for Cuba.
Okay. One of the things I wanted to ask you is that since you are, a writer and this is a memoir, so what advice or tips would you offer to other writers who have the idea, like I'd like to, I want to write something about me. I want to write my own memoir. What would be a good starting point and some advice for, yeah, as they work their way through the project?
I think people have to identify, any writer has to identify what's really pulling at you. Because I think whatever is pulling you, whatever is asking to be told, you almost have to think of the book or the work, whatever you're trying to write, as
Hmm.
something outside of you, almost like a child. Um, it's going to have its own life, so you have to start that dialogue, that internal dialogue. This sounds so woo woo, but this is definitely something that came out in the trip to Cuba. And it definitely is something that I've experienced in the whole writing process. There is the book wants to be out in the world and the book wants to be told. So I think the first question is, what is really pulling at me to be told? What story is really pulling at me? And from that point on, once you understand what needs to be told, what story needs to be told, then it's just a matter of showing up. And for me, it really was showing up every day at the
Hmm.
page. And I know that sounds I give the advice that no writer wants to hear. I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I get up every day. I write 5 words some days and sit there for an hour and pull my hair out. And then some days I write 3 pages, 5 pages, 10
Right.
pages, And some of my worst writing sessions where I walked away feeling like a fraud are in the book verbatim, and so it's just a matter of like it's not I have no hacks. It is not
Yeah.
sexy,
Well, though, I'm not looking for hacks, but like true with any kind of writing, this thing ain't gonna write itself.
It
You
ain't gonna
have
write itself. No.
ass and chair, just do the work, and write for as long as you can. If it's 30 minutes, great. If it's 3 hours, great. If you're happy with it, and that's also what editing and rewriting is for too.
Yeah, and the muse plays catch. You throw something and it comes back.
Hmm.
It's like the more you show up, the more you get back. And I think a lot of, it's like through the drudgery, people have to understand, writers have to you have to wait for that to start to happen.
Hmm.
And then you kind of have to let yourself become addicted to it. Otherwise, yeah, that's I think why people start to give up. It's like you and you also have to stay really clear with that original vision of what is this story that has to be told. You'll figure out the marketing and all of that gets figured out later. It's like I think people get a little wrapped up in like, are people going to care about this story?
Mm.
Well, you won't know until I certainly didn't think anyone would care until I had finished the book. And
Right.
then I was like, wait a second. I think other people will be able. Now it can be a book. Now it can. For
Hmm.
me, it started out as just a creative exercise, and now it's like, oh no, it needed to be a book.
And speaking of which, the book is A Little Piece
Yeah.
of Cuba. We've been talking to Barbara Caver. So what is next, Barbara? I mean, you haven't been able to go back, but you've been very, very busy, I'm sure, with other kinds of writing. Do you have is there another aspect, like some other chapter of your life that you think would make a good memoir? Is it, is something totally, totally different than that? I mean, if you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to.
Well, what's really interesting, especially since I just mentioned the muse. So I have been working on a novel for the last couple, probably 2 years, on and off. The novel definitely, well, all books, they take the time they're going to take.
Hmm.
But very recently, since A Little Piece of Cuba came out just a little over a month ago, I I felt like there was a third book starting to percolate, starting like there's it's like that seed is starting has been planted. And over the last talk about the muse playing fetch, over the last probably 12 hours that book has started to like it has started to speak to me, and it's not leaving me alone, and that's a memoir. So but I think I need a little more distance from that particular story before I can really write it. So in the meantime, I'll just go back to the novel, because coming off a memoir, I almost immediately started to write the novel while I was fine tuning A Little Piece of Cuba and getting it into the publishing world, trying to figure out what publishing route I wanted to take. Um, it was good. It's always good to have another creative project. So
Hmm.
having the novel was really, really good for me. Especially when you're hearing like no from publishers and no from agents, and it's like, oh, good. No, I'll just go back to the novel. So now I'm wondering if there's another memoir coming as a counterpoint to this novel. So that's where I am. Is like,
Okay.
and I also do write. Every other week I publish a Substack. It's called Tiny Escapes with Barb, and that I'm definitely keeping in the creative nonfiction memoir vein. I've sort of hit a good stride talking about travel and personal discovery, and very short. I try to keep it under 1,000 words, so it's
Mm.
a pretty short snippet. And I've started recording those as like little podcast episodes, so you can listen to it if you don't want to read it. That's just fun. Another like creative thing to keep in the hopper, which is good. So
Fantastic, fantastic. Well,
yeah.
again, the book is A Little Piece of Cuba, and we've been talking with Barbara Caver. Barbara, where can people find out not just about the book, but also where they can find out more about you and, as you said, your Substack and your other projects that are in development?
Yeah, the best place is my website, which is www.barbaracaverauthor.com. That connects to all my social media, Substack, and has an excerpt from A Little Piece of Cuba if you want to read it before you buy the book. that's there. And then a couple other samples from the novel that I'm working on, and then a few other little stories, which are always
And
fun.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you on your website, is there a link to the recipe for, is it arroz con pollo?
There is not,
Oh,
but I'm
oh.
about to do a little piece on Substack. I do a little. I was speaking of our comfort food theme. If
Hmm.
you're not watching a comfort food movie, I was talking to a friend of mine on New Year's Day, and we were talking. She was asking me for the recipe for picadillo, which is Cuban shepherd's pie, and then I was like, I should do a recipe a week on Substack. So that might be coming. So I'll lead off with the arroz con pollo recipe because that is supreme
Well,
comfort
and if
food.
that's the
You know,
prevalent, that's the dominant
it
dish
is.
mentioned it throughout the book too.
It is, and it is my it is one of my favorite Cuban dishes. I mean, I've eaten great versions of it and terrible versions of it all over the United States and Cuba, and even in like other Spanish and Spanish speaking countries. So I'll eat it anywhere. But my version is definitely one of my favorites.
Well, of
So
course, of course. And again, we've been talking with Barbara Caver about her book, A Little Piece of Cuba. Barbara, thank you so much for being here today. This was a very, 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 I can't, my mouth decided to not work. A very interesting chat.
this has been really fun, Paul. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And viewers and listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit like. Feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. For my social media, you can check out my screenwriting blog, MaximumZ.blog. On Twitter, I'm at Maximum_Z. And for Blue Sky and Instagram, it's at Pez Screenwriting. And this show has its own accounts as well at Podcast CWL on Twitter and on Blue Sky. And I've got my books as well, my 3 Go Ahead and Ask books on Amazon, the ones about screenwriting and pie. Like I said, that's Barbara. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.